Thank you for connecting to today's panel discussion series, Leadership in a Post-COVID-19 World. We are conducting a series of discussions on this topic to investigate how leadership is changing with perspectives across the globe. Today, we will be talking with a group of panelists from the Apac region, sharing their point of view on this topic. CEMS is working on a white paper with expert insights from across the Alliance that we will share in the new year. If you'd like to share your thoughts on this topic, please send a message to marketing@cems.org. As we are becoming more attuned to working virtually, there are many resources from CEMS that have been developed, including webinars and podcasts. In addition, the 2020 CEMS magazine focuses on the future of work, including industry insights into how companies have adapted during this pandemic. You can find this and more at the newly redesigned cems.org. Normally, this would have been conducted with Marie-Therese Class as the chair. We've had some technical difficulties this morning, so we hope that she'll be able to join us at some point. She is the professor at the Institute for Gender and Diversity in Organizations at the WU University of Economics and Business in Vienna. And she teaches on the CEMS MIM program and is part of the CEMS Global Leadership and Cross-Cultural Management faculty group. In addition, we have several panelists that are joining us today. Bianca Wong, as Global Head of Rewards and Vice President, Regional Human Resources at CEMS Corporate Partner Hilti Asia, Bianca drives the region's growth strategy and culture transformation together with the leadership team. Prior to Hilti, Bianca was the Group HR and Corporate Communications Director at Jebsen. Next, we have Akanksha. She is currently the Head of Strategy and Growth at Sonoda Shipping Agency and serves as a strategy consultant to RAX International and Trans Asia Marine Services in Singapore. She is currently serving as the Vice Chairman and Secretary of the Singapore Shipping Association's SSA Young Executives Group and is part of various other committees at SSA as well. Akanksha is the current 2021 CEMS Alumni Association Singapore President, a role she has had since 2014. And finally, we have Bettina Skudlar, who is an Associate Professor in Management at the University of Sydney Business School. Bettina's core research interests lie at the intersection of cross-cultural management, international HRM, and management of diversity. Bettina has worked with numerous multinational corporations and non-for-profits on developing intercultural competence and fostering global leadership excellence. Earlier in the year, CEMS decided to find out how our alumni and corporate partners have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We launched a survey that got 1,746 responses from global CEMS alumni and corporate partners. Strikingly, but not unexpectedly, 87% of the respondents believed the way their company does business globally would change as a result of the pandemic. During the first virtual EMEA panel on 21st of September, respondents agreed that the pandemic would lead to a number of permanent changes within global organizations in the region. So now we'd like to send the question to you. So the first question we would like you to respond to is, do you believe that some of the changes you have implemented in your organization because of the pandemic will become permanent? Okay, that's great. It looks like there's about 89% of the respondents that have said yes, that they believe that some of the changes that have been implemented in their organization because of the pandemic will become permanent. And about 11% that said no. And next, I will give the floor to Marie-Therese, who has been able to join us.
Okay, welcome everybody, and welcome to this webinar again. Let's go back to what we have done so far during this epidemic, this pandemic actually. So I would like to ask Bianca in the first place. You are the Global Head of Rewards and you are the Vice President Human Resources for Hilti in Asia. So in your region, in the APAC region, what specific challenges have you faced? And how have you responded to those challenges?
Thanks, Marie-Therese. Happy to start off. As you know, North Asia, which I'm responsible for, was probably the first to be hit by the pandemic overall, starting from China and then going into other locations. So the biggest challenge to start off with was the unpreparedness of how quick and widely it spread, and that affect our business. And most importantly, it's on how managers are working with their team members. Hilti itself has always been a company, because we're a sales organization, we've been a company that really embraced face-to-face contact overall. And that's stemming from managers with employees, senior leaders coming into out in the region to visit our team members and and so forth. So this immediately changed with the travel freeze and all of that. Immediately changed the whole dynamic of how we bring leadership up to the team members. So we have to do a lot of work in terms of connecting with team members right away through digital format, and also very quickly bring into leadership training on digital on how the managers can connect with their team members without face-to-face contact, especially if they are working with team members across different geographic regions. So that was something that we really responded in the first month or so, making sure that people are, from a leadership skills perspective, ready for this, but also from a emotional intelligence standpoint, and also from a physical well-being standpoint, physical and mental well-being standpoint, ready for continuous changes that we anticipate that will come along the way. So we've brought our cultural camps, which was originally already having place on wellness and well-being, accelerated it and brought it immediately to every leaders in our organization, who can then also bring it upon to their team members as well.
Yeah, and do you think that you will ever go back to the way you worked before, or does this mean a change? Has it changed the whole system or the structure or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been lots of discussion recently about where we will be, and it's pretty clear to us that we will go with a hybrid model in terms of how going from FaceTime, face-to-face at the office, and working more remotely. Actually, working remotely itself is not a new concept to us. I mean, our sales force are very independent, so they don't come to the office. They drive the red car and go out to customers every day on their own. However, that concept throughout the entire organization is not as well embraced. So we had to really think through how that would work. And the other thing that would change forever also is that how we would travel. I think in the past, a lot of the senior executives travel a lot, close to probably 70% of the time around the world. And a lot of things actually gets done only when people are traveling and all sitting together in the location, even including talent calibrations, including workshops and stuff like that. All of these, we now know for sure that we will cut down by half for sure, both from, of course, preparing for a lot of uncertainty ahead, but also in terms of working in a more agile way going forward, so that we don't have to wait for bigger people to get together and not to make decisions. So that we know will forever changing our dynamics and how we work.
Are there any positive aspects to that? I mean, I hear, for example, that more people participate in meetings and in trainings.
Absolutely. I mean, the training was a huge surprise. We've been now running on a bi-weekly basis short trainings. And in the past, these people were going to face-to-face training, and now every training that we run is on digital format. So we have actually more diverse team joining. Every training now we run, like last week we did a presentation training, and we have 89 colleagues from around the globe joining that training, and which in the past, especially for some of the smaller markets, they don't have that luxury to have training on their own for their team members. Now, even with just 3 or 4 people, they can join a training there. The other benefit that I saw was also with these smaller markets, which is actually growing. But in the past, because the senior executives, they would only travel to large countries, just because of sake of time. And now with all these virtual formats, they are able to reach out to various sizes of the market and be able to interact with talent and also discover a lot of, in their mind, hidden gems that could be developed in our organization. So I think that's, to me, it's a huge benefit now that we see. It's also a more equitable way to give attention of different organizations, which is unique in Asia.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to ask Akanksha, yes, I'm sorry, Akanksha. You have this experience with shipping companies. And that is, of course, a very specific sector of activity, and with a lot of challenges. I think we've all heard stories about ships being stuck somewhere, etc. So how did you manage the whole situation?
So, first of all, thanks for having me speak, and thanks for the question, Marie-Therese. So, well, shipping has had a lot of global challenges. It's not just regional. So yeah, you're right. One of the challenges was, this crew change issue, which I think some of you may have read about it, that basically crew was stranded on board vessels. So it would be hard to get them to sign on or sign off when they're like, essentially their shift ends. Basically, it's their contract ending. So that was a big issue, but I think things like, open communication, open sharing of information has started really taking off in the shipping industry, which is traditionally known to be a more, slow moving and, traditional industry, basically. But what they've started doing is to facilitate such things like crew change, there's open knowledge sharing, information sharing, there's working groups put together. There's a lot of flow of information, not just from bottom up, where people generally that's complaints, right? But even very good advisory coming from government regulators in Singapore, telling us exactly what needs to be done. So, or what is happening and what can be expected. So this open communication is happening, which usually really didn't happen because, it's a very protective industry of itself. We also had a lot of supply chain disruptions. If you remember early on in the year, when all of this started, you would remember that basically China being our factory floor, there was a lot of issues getting, things from manufacturing centers to retailers. But what happened is a lot of companies, whether in Singapore or worldwide, actually, a lot of companies rely on their relationships with their local partners, with their vendors, with their clients, and they establish an environment of trust to ensure that, if you're doing a procedure correctly, then only I will import your product, so that, there's safety for everyone who's using these products and then involved in the entire process. The last thing I'd like to share that was an issue, which is kind of unique to Singapore, was that, we had the Singapore and Malaysia border control. Borders were closed on 18th March. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but there are a lot of Malaysians on the south side of Malaysia, like Johor Bahru, that basically travel to Singapore on a daily basis to work here. And then they had to make a decision, right? Like whether they go back to Malaysia and stay there throughout this border closure, or they decide to come into Singapore and they'd have to basically, stay the journey. They don't know how long the border closure would be. So that was pretty interesting to watch, because there was a lot of communication happening between employees and employers, and there's a lot of, you have to bank on that trust you've had for years with your staff or with your employees or employers even, because you really need to like assure them that, okay, if you stay, I will take care of you. And if the employer is saying that stay please, then employee has to know that, okay, I'm in safe hands and I will get, proper remuneration or proper taken care of, and I also have to be there for the company. So that was pretty interesting to see. So for instance, my colleagues, there are 4 of them who are still here since March 18th. They have families, they have kids, they're still here, and we're mutually respectful, and there's a level of trust there. So these were some of the issues we faced, just some of them in Singapore.
Does it mean that some of your people, for example, have been separated from their families since March?
Yes, they have been physically separated, sadly, but of course there's enough communication, there's enough, but that is the sad fact of life, that is what's happening with a lot of people as well. They can go back, of course, there's no bond, but the problem is when they go back, they'll have to serve a stay home notice there, and then there's restrictions on coming back and how often you can come back. So you can't come back on a daily basis. So either you can apply for a furlough and all of that, which of course you have the ability to do that, but it's life. There's a livelihood that you have to sustain as well. So that's the situation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We might come back to that problem actually. I would like to address Bettina now. Because Bettina has been doing leaders and leadership and the responses to the pandemic. And Bettina, I think all of us have more or less admired what was happening in New Zealand, and we know that in New Zealand and Australia, things have been very, very different compared to, for example, Europe. The European responses, of course, the geographic situation is very different as well. But I mean, what kind of cultural aspect would play a role here? Is there anything that you have discovered that would be different between, I would say, let's say, the European approach and the approach in your region of the world?
Thank you, Marie-Therese, for the question. Good morning and good evening, everyone. It's almost 10 p.m. in Sydney. So yes, Marie-Therese, that's a very good question. We've been pondering very much, especially while the situation was evolving, why the responses were so different. And in some way, I have to say that my European colleagues and I, who are based in here, we kind of felt that the Australian overreacted. And it was very interesting for us to kind of analyze it as the situation was evolving and trying to understand why, for example, Australia closed the borders while the World Health Organization said not to do so. So we've been, discussing a lot throughout the process, some of the underlying causes, and we feel that one of the big differences in terms of response is, Asia and therefore probably Australia had still some memory of the SARS virus response. And the Asian countries responded really quickly, and therefore people in those countries perceived the risk of COVID as potentially way more severe than most of the people in Europe who wouldn't have experienced anything closely similar to that. So I feel that the response of almost a panic versus almost ignorance is a little bit based on the previous experience and the previous learnings. So yeah, that there is I think a part of cultural response, but there is also a learning that probably some of the countries didn't have.
Yeah, but did you see also the leaders, for example, of European companies or local companies in your region, that the response was different there?
I think absolutely yes, because based on the public opinion and the response of the public opinion to the virus, the leaders had no choice but to follow what the public opinion was giving them. So again, in Australia, if you would read news, the news in Australia versus news in Europe, oh, there is just a virus versus, oh my goodness, there is a virus and these are the numbers and this is how many people could die. So leaders responding to people who were having very tangible fears had no choice in our part of the world but to have a response that is much more severe. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. We are now moving to the leadership skills, actually, because what we noticed in the survey was that some new skills or competencies were expected from leaders that are reinforced, that were stronger than they used to be, like resilience and empathy. And communication, as was already mentioned, or cultural intelligence. And these qualities seem to have become more important since the crisis started, actually. And in our first panel, we already discussed some of these issues and especially the trust, actually, that is needed. And that was also mentioned by Bianca, for example. So we'll move to the second poll question for you. Do you think the leadership skills needed in the pandemic are different in different regions of the world? Okay, interesting. So it's a yes for nearly 60%, I would say, and a no for 40%. So quite different reactions here, which is quite interesting, because we hear a lot from Asia, that if you want to work there, you need a mindset transformation and a competence transformation. So I would like to ask Bianca, actually, what kind of qualities are you looking for now when you are recruiting at Hilti? What kind of leadership skills or qualities are you looking for?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Certainly, I think that with the last few months of experience, we've started to weight a lot more from a leadership standpoint, a lot more on people who have the ability to build leadership through trust. That's what we now call an outcome-based leadership rather than input-based. In the past, I think, especially in Asian countries, it's very prevalent that a lot of people look at what are the tasks you've completed. I want to plan that with you. I give you objectives, and you know, every step along the way, you tell me the action plans and so forth. And this is not something new. I think many studies on future of works have talked about that we're shifting from outcome-based. Certainly, the pandemic, I think, again, has accelerated it because of remote working. And because of the so much uncertainty that's out there, that you can't really try to plan everything, you know, along the way, and you have to have trust with the people that they're going to deliver wherever they are, whatever they're doing, and also being able to have a strong trust across the team, which is maybe sitting in different parts of the world, of the region, without interacting with, without having face-to-face interaction with each other. So I think the other thing that's really strong is the ability to lead and manage change. Again, this is nothing new, but given how much uncertainties people have faced now and can foresee going forward, then this is probably a prerequisite, you know, for any leaders to be able to really deal with change within themselves truly, and be able to also lead to manage change with their people. This is something that is really important. If I'm looking at Asia, there's still, to some extent, a very strong, somehow directing leadership style, you know, and then that probably with what I was talking before, you know, trust-based, that really have to move away to more empathetic leadership. And that's sort of telling, you know, going from a teaching, telling approach to a very strong coaching, empathetic way of managing the teams. And that's more important in our region. If you think about North Asia, where we manage, you know, you have Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, who are so different culturally. And without being there, and how are you able to have that cultural sensitivity to manage teams across the region would be something that is even more important than before. You know, that you are able to have that cultural sensitivity and knowledge, even working remotely.
Okay, thank you very much. Akanksha, what about your leadership skills? I mean, what you're looking for, and what, I mean, in this industry where you are, I mean, it's very, very different. And are there any good examples that you have in your sector for good leadership in this kind of crisis?
Yeah, the answer has to be yes. If not, like, you know, the industry won't survive. So that's a yes. But whatever, you know, all of this being said, these are black swan events. At the end of the day, you can't predict or you can't fully prepare for them. But strong leadership has come across in places and organizations which have upheld, you know, a certain way of governance and leadership, even during pre-COVID times. So, you know, these are like similar things to, of course, what Bianca and Bettina have said, which is, you know, practicing empathy, communicating goals, you know, seeking feedback throughout, and always be forward thinking. So, for instance, you know, like this isn't something that, you know, it's magically appearing. It's something that you've been doing in the past, and now you're reaping the benefits of it. So, but before I go into the industry, I can also like share something about just being Singaporean as well, because I'm quite happy and I'm quite proud of how Singapore has handled it. For instance, like the leaders were always, you know, open. They were transparent. They kept all communication channels open, both ways. They also took decisive and swift action to implement like various stimulus packages. The first package was introduced even before they knew the full socioeconomic impact, you know, of the pandemic. So this is a key quality of good and, you know, resilient leadership, to navigate ambiguity and prioritize speed, you know, over elegance. And that is to say, you know, put up, you know, swift, decisive actions, even though you don't really know what's happening, but you have the courageous face on. Even on the shipping industry side, for instance, I'll share with you something that I think would be a negative way of handling this. You know, for example, like end of last year, in the last quarter, there was a really, you know, prominent professor, Professor Helen Sampson. She was the director of the Cardiff University's Seafarers International Research Center. All of that just means that she basically knows what she's doing and what she's talking about. So she basically did a study with a crew on board vessels, and she said that a lot of seafarers working on cargo ships quoted to have experienced very little happiness on board, and only 55% of employers said that they tackled this, to address mental health issues, and they wanted to address it in the future as well. Now, this happened before the pandemic. So, of course, the employers who dealt with these issues before clearly have a more resilient workforce and have, come across as stronger leaders. Unfortunately, the employers who didn't deal with it now have to face increasingly declining mental health of the workforce. So it's what, like, for the question you asked, I just like to say that I think leadership is whatever you did pre-COVID is reaping its its benefits or its bad things now. So there's no real, there are clear examples of very good people who have done this, but these are just two of the examples, good and bad, that I thought I could share.
Yeah. So it depends on the leadership. The strong leaders will succeed in that kind of situation, and the others will fail.
Yes, because right now we're building the ship as we go. We're not just just repairing it. We have to do a lot of building as we go. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to come back to Bettina about this. Bettina, in your study, what would you say are the three main leadership qualities that came out of it? The three main ones that would be necessary?
I think a lot of what has been said in some way comes back to our study, which is, we had the importance of empathy, of course, the fact that you can relate to those who are, having a tremendous fear, but also those who might be ignorant and trying to manage those conflicting perspectives. But the two other things which came to us very strongly were actually things such as humility and admitting that, well, I might not have all the answers, and that's okay. So there was this element of suddenly many strong leaders. Those that came out the strongest out of this experience were those that were able to say, I don't have all the answers. This is a new situation. I learn as I go, and I have amazing experts around me. So we have also learned really and gained a whole new perspective on the concept of collective leadership. And in many of those meetings that we observe in media, we would see that suddenly the front stage was a health expert, and that person was at the forefront of leading the country through the pandemic. So I think it was interesting to see that collective notion of leadership that we know is out there, but somehow always, the loudest speaking individual gets the credit. Yeah. So I think there was a lot that we learn in practice about how little egos mean in situations where really leadership and knowledge and expertise and working together is important.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. There's a last part of our discussion actually, and I would really invite people to answer also in the chat and to comment on this. We are going to discuss a little bit what practically can be done to raise and cultivate that kind of leaders that we need now, that we.
Yeah, I think something happened again for Marie-Therese. I put up the poll. So the question is, have you received training to help you be more resilient within your current organization or role? Okay, and it looks like we have a lot of people who are saying no, they did not receive training, which, it's quite interesting and quite revealing as well. So what I would like to do is ask the question to Akanksha. Is it possible to train leaders to be more resilient? And if so, how?
So I was, this is a tough question. And I was grappling with this for a very long time, even with the panelists before when we had a session. But so after I found out I was doing this panel, I actually asked quite a few business leaders and I asked them their take on this question. And I was very surprised, and many of them were, Asian ethnicity, but many of them said that, no, this is an innate thing. You either have it or you don't. And I think it's because many people think resilience should be classified as a characteristic rather than a skill set. But I do think after thinking about it and reading up more about, how resilience can be trained, I do think, yes, resilience can be inculcated. But there are 2 ways to define resilience. One would be your personal resilience, and one would be your organizational resilience. And you cannot achieve organizational resilience if you ignore personal resilience. So it actually makes me a bit sad that the poll says no. Most people say no on that, but I do still hope that people are thinking it's still important to train your personal resilience, because during tough times you can't train resilience quite as much. It gets tested. So you really have to, as I said, as I've been saying in the past, that you just have to bank it all in and then hope that you have enough when tough times are striking. I'm going to say something kind of Zen now. Resilience is not a destination, it is a way of being. So it sounds very Zen, but I read this on a Deloitte thing, so I was like, okay, let me use this. But how would you inculcate resilience other than the traits we've been talking about? Genuine and authentic empathy, open two-way communication, higher EQ. Is that we also have to encourage people, I think, to practice mindfulness, practice gratitude, to take time off to prioritize their mental health and replenish their body and soul. Body and mind, actually, more concretely. And this is a constant daily effort that as individuals we also have to do, and we have to realize that resilience is knowing that we have the responsibility and the power to pick ourselves up. Now, what organizations have to do is to provide enough tools to make it easier for employees to do that, perhaps by organizing sessions, whatever, breathing or meditation sessions, or giving time off for personal time, or even small simple things like being less micromanaging, so that you give people more ability to have control of their time. Also, I think if you have a resilient leader in your organization and you recognize that, it's important that during such challenging periods, because their resilience is being tested, it's important to incentivize and reward them when they make sacrifices to make the organization succeed. Moreover, if you are the resilient leader in your organization, then your every move is monitored. It's subject to intense scrutiny, and you might feel you're overinterpreted. So it's important to maintain some semblance of sanity, and so you perhaps should have a sparring partner or a network that you can go back to, like-minded peers outside of the company, so that you can talk to, let off some steam, discuss issues with them. And this allows you to keep looking ahead and not backwards, even if you don't feel very optimistic. So resilience is something that is a daily thing. And this is my general opinion about resilience after I did some soul searching and reading up on it. So this is what I think, how resilience can be trained.
Marie-Therese, if I could follow up on this one. Are you okay? I'm saying one of the interesting aspects is that, the U.S. Department of State, and the part of the U.S. Department of State that deals with training all the diplomatic staff and all the Peace Corps volunteers, they have been training resilience for a number of years. So if you want to, read up about the perspective they took, and, we talk here about people who might be sent to really, war zones and other areas, which, where you really need to respond very quickly, and when the situation changes, very rapidly, and you are responsible for your whole, diplomatic staff surrounding you, or the, success of the mission. This is critical for them, that those people don't break into pieces. So, advances in global leadership, I believe this year, Ray Leckey, there was an interesting piece of how they structure resilience training in that context, which I think could be very much relevant to organizations, all over the world.
Yeah, if I may, just riding on, what Akansha and Bettina was saying, I do also believe that it's something that you build up over time. And if you think about people who have gone through traumatic experience and the life experience, there are people who had really built up resilience through those. Of course, I don't hope that with anyone, and as all, but it shows that this is something that people actually can build on. And I think organization really can do a lot of things with it. I think one of the things, maybe also particularly in the Asian context, that we don't really celebrate enough failures. We celebrate a lot of successes, from how I'm growing up in the high school, elementary school, high school, all the way is always the top of the class that got celebrated. You have to get awards and stuff like that. You don't celebrate people who have most advanced, who have made most effort and who have really made a difference. And I really like the what Akansha mentioned about that. Sometimes those who are resilient, they don't get mentioned because they just went through it, and then they don't, people don't get mentioned like that. And so I feel that organization actually can play a role in training, that not just on an actual training that would be very helpful as well, but also on observing the culture and the leadership style of the organization. And are you really also celebrating failures or only celebrating successes? And I think that's something that we are also exploring. I don't say that we're already there, but that was something that we started exploring actually last year. As we were going through this cultural change, and we know that there's so much unknown in our industry. Think about potential disruption that's coming in the construction industry is right now an unknown. I mean, we know disruption in hospitality, in transportation, but how is it going to look like for a construction industry? There's a bit of an unknown. So it's important for us to know that it's good to try things. It's good to try, and if something doesn't work, how do you fail fast and come back? How do you learn from that experience? And this is something that we really started building now. And I hope that more organizations can share their experience around this area, and that creates kind of even not just an organization-wide, but also maybe even culturally and community-wide habit of celebrating, failures together with success. Failures is a pathway to win. And that the other thing also goes back to the personal resilience that Akansha mentioned, is also that's how to build the self-esteem of people. If every time someone fails, you just keep banging on that person and so forth, you don't build a self-esteem. And I personally believe that self-esteem is a crucial part of someone that's being resilient. Something we can.
Oh yeah, it looks like we don't have the sound from Marie-Therese. But this does actually bring up a very interesting point and a question that was asked from the audience. So this is coming from John Shields at the University of Sydney Business School. And his question was around, do you think that the COVID-induced shift of working from home to digital task work and communication will change the way employee performance is defined, measured, managed, and rewarded? And I think, maybe that goes also to the point of the question of taking risks and, accepting failures. So I don't know, Bianca, if you'd want to take that one.
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the things what I mentioned before is about really shifting our performance management to truly outcome-based. I think in the past there's a lot being mentioned there, but it's if you really visit our performance management framework, there's still a lot of actions being there. So it's more about truly managing it on outcome-based basis instead of input-based. And I think that's a journey that a lot of organizations have to go through. So you don't care what people do to get to that angle, as long as they get to the angle. If they fail 15 times, 10 times, 100 times, it doesn't matter. As long as you have the trust and faith that that person is going to get to that angle. And also in their way, in the way that they believe it works. And I think that will be changing more and more organizations, going beyond just the digital companies into more mainstream industry.
I have a question actually for the three of you, final question, because recently some students told me we are the generation of the broken dreams. All the possibilities and the opportunities they are missing now because of the COVID, etc. How would you react to that? I mean, Bettina as a university and Bianca and Akansha as companies, how would you react to that? What would you tell them, or what would you do?
I couldn't disagree more. We kind of, in all those interactions we are having over the last year with our students, is that actually what is happening is that they get to experience something extraordinary and take it as an opportunity to grow and learn. So we always tell them that when things go smoothly, there are few opportunities to actually learn, because you take for granted what is happening. However, when things don't go well, that's the moment when you need to stop and think over and really use your brain way more effectively. And I say, you are going to be the ones to go into job interviews and tell how you overcome all the challenges of COVID, and how you moved on and grew and become stronger leader from that, and how you learn new skills. So we see it as an opportunity as opposed to something that actually hinders them. But it does require a lot of conscious effort. And I think the strongest of them will emerge as stars, while some will struggle.
Resilience. Yeah. Any reaction, Bianca or Kancha?
Yeah, I just added on. I mean, certainly agree that I certainly I agree that to disagree with that statement. There's huge opportunities coming. I mean, we think about, yes, this is not an easy year, but it's 1 year, and maybe 2, and it's okay. You know, there's 2 out of many, many years to come. And oftentimes, what we learn is that, you know, good things will come around, and there's tons of opportunities will come around. I think a lot of societal changes will start to happen, you know, around employment, what skills is required, and there's tons of opportunities for something that's disruptive, you know, going forward. And that's really where I see the young, the new generation, the young generation can contribute tons, you know, to build the futures in a sustainable way.
So I'll add in. You know, honestly, I feel really bad that people are having a lot, and I feel for them. But I echo what Tina and Bianca are saying. I do think you have to look for the opportunities amid this crisis. There is no choice, I feel. And I also don't think the future is that bleak. You have the opportunity to actually use this to your advantage. And you're here at the cusp of change. You know, basically how things are going to work from now onwards are going to change. A lot of older people, in fact, feel very out of place right now because they do not know how to operate, you know, things like Zoom or Google Hangouts, things like that. You know, for them, they might also harbor these, you know, fears. And it's very interesting because all of us have this thought, and then there are some people who have that thought that, you know, generation of broken dreams. And it's important to realize that, you know, we shouldn't always romanticize hardships and tough times, you know, saying that, oh, you know, hard things make you stronger. Different people need different things to grow. So if you have students like that, then perhaps they need, you know, to be engaged in kind of another kind of open discussion, or sort out what they're feeling, and then maybe get them to retrain themselves. Maybe they feel like they're ill-equipped, or they don't have the right skill sets. So it's just, you know, it is, mindsets are different. So it's not up to us to tell them, no, you're thinking wrong. Clearly they have something, you know, that they have to work through as well. So, you know, we have to realize there are 2 kinds of people right now, and there's a lot of anxiety. So enforcing resilience on someone isn't going to happen. You have to realize that there are 2 different approaches.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you all for your very interesting and fascinating insights. And I think we have time to take some questions now. Are there any?
Yes, so we have 2 more questions. One from Melvin K from the CEMS alumni in LC Malaysia. And he had asked the question, do you think the pandemic has changed the viewpoints of management leaders towards new work norms for work culture? For example, the idea of working from home, face-to-face meetings only when necessary, especially from a large MNC or traditional corporate organization in the region.
Anybody feels like they would like to answer?
Maybe I'll start. So yeah, absolutely. I think it would be interesting if any organization is not looking into this new way of working, because you can't just bang on the idea that everything goes back to normal. I mean, we already stopped that phrase altogether as an organization. Say, go back to normal. What is the normal? You know, that's never going to go back. So that just have to be a reality that we. But what I think is interesting is not just about leadership. Okay, what's, you know, then sometimes remote, sometimes face-to-face, but it's really identifying how do we optimize or maximize the time we have. How do we optimize the time that we work remote? You know, how do you individually work productively in a flexible way? And that also works from a team aspect as well. So all of these are many organizations, I would say, must go through, because that will become a competitive advantage if other organizations are offering more flexibility, and if our organization is not, then certainly, you know, we all know the talent war in Asia, and so that people would opt for, you know, flexibility and without. But as I mentioned before, it's not just about the time; it's about how do we maximize that time to make it truly engaging with the people as well.
Right. Okay. Akanksha?
Well, I can speak to this from an SME point of view because I work in SMEs, right? So I mean, definitely everyone's thinking of new normals. There's no one who thinks that it's going to go back. Bianca's spot on. But yeah, it's about optimizing your time and also giving a lot of like independence to your colleagues and your staff or your teammates, and letting them show initiative as well. Because you'll be surprised once you just delegate. Like in these times, people, I don't know whether initiative has increased or it's just that it's been always like hidden and not allowed to, like, you know, come out. It's so out there right now that if you give some if you give up work or divide up work, it gets done. You don't really have to worry that much. You know, the micromanaging doesn't need to happen, so that's clearly happening. You really have to just optimize the time that you have with your teammates, and it doesn't matter if their pets are showing up in your Zoom calls. It doesn't matter if their kids are showing up. This is actually what I like about what's happening right now, is that the lines between corporate life and personal life are being blurred, and therefore it is very important to realize that a person, a human being, is, you know, he's the same person or she's the same person divided in those two fields, exactly like how resilience works. So, you know, you can't have one without the other. So that way, you know, you're giving people a lot of independence and letting them be themselves, while as long as the work gets done.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Is there another question that we have time for?
Yep, we have 2 more questions. So this one's coming from Natadipan from the CEMS Global Office. And she asks, do you observe a gender-specific leadership style playing a role in the APAC region?
I'd like to take that.
One.
Yeah, it's very tricky. It's very tricky, but I'm gonna change the metrics of the question a little bit. I hope you don't mind, Natalie. But I don't know about the APAC region. I also haven't read up that much or studied that much about how female-specific leadership is you know, becoming better or not doing better. But what I remember reading about and being very keenly interested in is back when this pandemic was spreading, Forbes had reported that, you know, female leadership and female-led countries were doing better at actually dealing with the virus. Now, they had mentioned that there were 4 main things that the women were doing that was not really being shown in men, which was that they were leading with truth and honesty. They were very decisive in their actions. They were, as I said, you know, navigating ambiguity with some decisive courage. They used a lot of technology to ensure that their population was safe. So they also instilled, even if it's an aging population, they were trying to instill for them to learn tech. And there was a lot of love. So the love is that X factor, which, you know, it's hard to quantify. It's hard to like put into words. But so I know that I was very happy with that, and I did some charity drive based around that. So I think that female-driven organizations have been doing better, but again, this is a feeling, and the fact that, you know, I read that Forbes article and I've been following that for a while now, and but I don't have anything specific. I don't know if Bettina and Bianca have something specific on that.
Okay, maybe they do. Bianca, you were nodding. On Bettina, in your study?
I'm happy to speak, you know, not necessarily from that study perspective, but in general about gender and leadership. I think my perspective on it is that, you know, all the characteristics that came out in the CEMS study, you know, empathy and, you know, embracing the collective recognition, that's something that in some way women are quite often socialized early on to show and to value. And therefore that now becomes more important. But I think much of what we now attribute to gender, I think, are just the, you know, leadership qualities that every leader should have. And I hope that we are going to kind of learn from this experience that this is not about men, women, it's about good leadership. And good leadership means all of those, you know, things and more that Akanksha just mentioned. So I hope that we will drop the gender stereotypes and move towards embracing qualities beyond egos in leadership.
Yeah, but there still is a difference between the gender and as you said, socialization. Bianca.
Just add on one point. I mean, to me, is the importance of diversity. I think one of the things that personally, when I see how our team in Asia navigates through the early stages of pandemic, I think it was because, I mean, one of the reasons I think we have a very diverse team overall. In many ways, right? We have Europeans, Asians, we also have different gender and so forth, different backgrounds. And I think having that collaborative, like what Bettina mentioned, more importantly is a leader that embraces collaborativeness and then to be able to embrace the diversity that we have in organization. We have to make decisions, really hearing very different aspects, or point of view, especially in the early stages of the pandemic, on how to react on things. And that diversity, I think, drives a strong commitment in the end, from everyone to the to make it work.
Okay, thank you. I think we have five more minutes, so maybe we can take another question still.
Great. So we have one more question. This is coming from Rafael Sarda from ESADE. And he says, coming from this pandemic, did you start to consider as a major risk a world socio-ecological collapse? So maybe thinking bigger than the pandemic itself.
This is a hard one, so clearly I'll go first.
Yeah.
I didn't, Rafael, I didn't 100% get it, but I think you mean that if the world doesn't recover, I think that's kind of what you meant. But I think, since this topic is a little bit about resilience, I definitely think humans have a very strong survival instinct. So I mean, the anxiety set aside, the early on confusion of what's going to happen set aside, humans will bounce back. Us as a race or countries as a whole will bounce back. So I don't think we thought really as, okay, everything's going to fail and, things are not going to recover. The question is how much time it will take and how much resources, should be allocated to that. So personally, no, I think early on when there was a lot of anxiety, sure, as I said, you don't feel optimistic and you start looking back. But, that's human nature. You then have a survival instinct kick in.
We noticed
I hope I understood your
pandemic.
Yeah.
Sorry. During the first pandemic, we noticed actually that nature was very fast in coming back. The air, the water, everything recovered in a certain sense. That maybe it made people a bit more conscious and aware of the problems actually and of the scale of the problem.
Just adding on, so go ahead, Bettina.
Go, Bianca.
Okay, I mean, just adding on to what Akansha said, I think there's going to be a shift of focus. I think economy has played a really huge role in from industrialization, all the way to the second wave. Now we're going to the third wave, and I think especially going through this pandemic, I think a lot of people have done a lot of soul searching as well. In terms of like, what is our impact on society? What's our impact on the environment, and what's the environment's impact on us? And I think a lot of individuals, and which will translate into how organizations should be looking at their role, not just from an economical standpoint, but truly looking at it from a community, social, and environmental aspect. And this is going beyond just, reporting some numbers, or planting some trees. It's really talking about the core of your business has to work with the environment. And I think that's something that I think the more successful companies will strive if they tap on this area. So I don't think it's going to be a collapse, but there's going to be a shift of focus.
Bettina, you wanted to add something?
I'm happy to speak to the next question, since we have one more in the time. Because that's something we actually looked at. So Rebecca.
Yes, there is one last question. I think this is a great way to close this out. So the question is, can you give an example of a leader you think has handled the pandemic particularly well?
So when we did our study, we were just in the midst of things evolving, and it was interesting when you read those different opinions of experts, because we had experts from industry, academics, from the UN, and so on and so forth. And the situation is continuously evolving. So we are still going to see what leadership is going, and which individual is going to emerge as the leader. I think Jacinda Ardern has been praised all over the world, and we've heard that. For her, approach, which probably again very much overlaps with what Akanksha has said. But I think we have, also at that time seen, isn't, for example, Australia overreacting, since the health organizations are telling not to close the border, but yet they did, and so on and so forth. So I think it's an evolving process, and the pandemic and the virus is one thing. The recovery will be a new test of leadership, and the two are combined, because you can't leave a country in a terrific, deficit without a strong recovery plan. So I think we are yet to give a real judgment call on the leadership of the pandemic in years to come.
Okay, I think the CEMS will continue with webinars and discussions, and a lot of these topics may come back at another point. But I think we need to conclude here. Do write your comments and questions still that we would address in another webinar, in another panel. So anybody who is out there, please comment and send us your comments and questions and ideas for another panel in the future, which CEMS will organize.